black peppercorns come from, Piper nigrum. It's a cousin of the root beer plant up front, which is Piper auratum. This is guava, and there's a lemon right there. And then there's these huge lemons down here. So you can see that's the biggest lemon in the world.
The Ponderosa lemon that I have is out in the middle of the yard. It doesn't need, it's fine. It doesn't need the heat of...
Where are you located?
I'm just in DeLand.
Yeah, you've got about 10 degrees warmer than us.
Okay.
Generally.
You're from the south.
Yeah, okay.
And you're a little close to the ocean too. If I remember DeLand, when I was over there, I saw some stuff growing in DeLand that doesn't pull off here very well. And it also helps if you're in the city, if you have buildings around you, or if you have any kind of canopy, tree canopies that keep the warmer air. You'll read a lot of times like what you want to do for the winter is you want to put lots of mulch on the ground. You know, like, oh, you got to put lots of mulch around your trees so your trees don't freeze. It's actually the opposite here. In our area of Florida, you're not worried about the ground freezing. You're worried about the top of the tree freezing down to the ground. Further north, people are worried that the roots are going to get killed on their plants. Here, you don't have to worry about that. It doesn't usually ever get cold enough to freeze the ground to any level of depth. So if you have, say, an orange tree, and you put a bunch of mulch around the orange tree to protect the base of it, you're actually keeping the warmth of the ground from coming up overnight. The ground is warmer than the air. So the better thing to do is to clear the ground to bare sand around an orange tree overnight. And that warmth is always transmitting up from the sand. And so the ground here is 72 degrees year-round. If you go a little deeper, it's always warm in the ground. And so you want the heat of the ground just radiating up all night long, rather than covering it with mulch and keeping it, you got cold air coming down to the mulch and rolling along like that. So it's a little different than you would think of. If we had a night where it got down to 20 degrees and it stayed at 20 degrees through the next day, they would be toast. That's what happens up in Tennessee or North Georgia or wherever else. Here we only usually go below freezing for a couple of hours. The ground is not going to freeze over that period of time. So the best thing to do is never prune your citrus, but to leave it to make a big canopy, you know, a big umbrella of leaves, like if you see an old grapefruit tree where it's almost touching the ground. It makes a bubble of warm air, and then have bare ground underneath it, and that bare ground is raising up heat. So you've got a pocket of air that protects the trunk from splitting. The tree can afford to lose a lot of leaves, but it cannot afford to have the trunk split and crack, because that'll let in the disease, the tree dies. So, and you can also tuck citrus into part shade. I planted 2 little orange trees in the front yard when we first got here. One was just under the canopy of an oak. One was 20 feet away out in the open. The one that was out in the open and the one under the oak, we had a night that got colder than I expected. I thought, I don't need to cover them. Well, it got down into the upper 20s. The one tree froze to the ground, the trunk cracked. The one just under the canopy of the oak didn't freeze, didn't even have damage on it. And that's because that oak, the warm air is rising, there's this pocket of warmth. It's almost like magic. You can have one area of your yard where everything dies, and another area where it's like nothing got touched. You can actually walk around your yard after the first frost of the year, a couple of days later, and see where the warm spots and the cold spots are based on where the weeds died. And then you plant your trees accordingly. You got a chance to observe. But yeah, so I've got the black pepper and the coffee have lived here, which surprises me to no end. And the key limes, we got key limes. And then the bananas are actually being fed off of the sink. The kitchen sink here is running out the wall into these bananas, so we're recycling the water from the sink into bananas. Bananas like at least 100 inches of water a year. They're really pigs when it comes to water. They also will take high nitrogen. You can put like raw manure and stuff around bananas, and they usually don't get burned. So all the kitchen scraps and stuff are going into here, and we throw raw compost mess all over it. We've thrown raw chicken manure, whatever else. And all the water goes out here to bananas, and they produce, it's usually about 120 pounds of bananas a year or something like that. So, yeah, it's pretty good. You know, it's pretty good. It takes a couple of years to get going, but they get going. Those are monsters. We got these bananas from a foreclosure originally. The guy's like, man, they're going to clear this whole property out. They're just kicking me out. They're going to clear the whole thing. You want to take some of this? I said, yeah, absolutely. So we dug up some of the banana trees. We dug up some loquats, and these are foreclosure bananas.
Why do they have this big long stem coming out the bottom?
So you can pull them down?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why God made them like that, so you can pull them down. Actually,
No, I know
you can see it back there. There's the flower.
Yeah.
On that one back there. There was a bloom on there,
Right.
but when it gets closer to the end of the season, cutting the bloom off tends to make the bananas ripen faster. I learned that trick from Joe Pierce. It causes them to ripen a little faster. The way bananas produce is the first few rounds of blooms are the females, the ovary banana, right? So that's and then the next few are pollen donators. The male flowers come out afterwards. So all of these scars right here is where the male flowers came out of the bloom. So the first few rounds are female, and then it just goes male blooms. All the rest of the blooms will be male after dropping blooms out of it. But the bananas aren't going to get, you're not going to get any more bananas. So cutting the bloom off stimulates it to hurry up.
I cut the bloom off too, but I cut it off right below the last bananas up there.
I had seen people doing that, but when I did it, it caused rot to get up into the bananas, and I lost more of the fruit. The bottom bananas started rotting. So what I've done is just let them get usually a foot or so, and then cut it, and that way it's got healing space before it gets back up to the fruit that I'm trying to protect. I've actually got a hand of bananas hanging just inside the window here that's ripening up. You can cut your bananas even when they're this green and bring them inside. When it gets to, bananas quit growing at about 70 degrees. So it gets below 70, they just sit there. So at this time of year, these bananas haven't grown today. They're just like doing nothing. If you get a nice hot day, they grow real fast. And they grow like crazy and they bloom. So you kind of just got to wait until it gets warm again to get more bananas. But when it starts to get cold, realize like these bananas are not going to really ripen up anymore here. So I wait until the last day right before frost and cut all the hands of bananas off and hang them inside. And then once they're disconnected from the tree, they often start ripening in a couple of weeks. And they may not be as great as if you got them right off the tree, but they're still good.
Don't they have to be big enough to get ripe though?
I thought that was the case, but then I had a banana tree fall over on me and I didn't notice it and it had little bananas on it, and they actually ripened up and sweetened up just from it. So I was like, well, maybe for commercial bananas, but some varieties may differ. And also, these are a really good cooking banana. They're a little starchier than the commercial ones. The variety is actually called Orinoco, but Craig Hepworth identified them for me. It's like we all trade ideas. He came over here, he's like, oh, those are Orinoco. I said, well, I said, I eat them fresh, and they're like, okay, fresh. I said, but when we fried them, they were awesome. And he's like, yeah, they're very good cooking bananas. It's about a half-size plantain. And you can grow bananas. You just got to get them a lot of water, a lot of fertilizer, and you got to realize that some years you're just not going to get any fruit because it's going to freeze off. But they don't take much work. Once they have, you got a gutter running into a pit. You throw a bunch of manure in the pit, do the banana circle thing like you've seen in some of the permaculture design books. This is basically a modified banana circle. It's just running off of our sink. So it's always a constant sloppy mess back there, but bananas love it.
Do you worry about getting rid of the pups often?
No, after they bloom like this, I'll cut the entire tree down. Each one, because a banana tree will only bloom once, and then the babies come up and they do it next. So when that trunk has bloomed, it's done. It's not going to do any more. It counts a certain amount of leaves, and then it puts out the bloom, and then the next one will do it. The real life of the banana is that root beneath the ground. So I have divided off a few pups here and there, but these things are so huge and heavy. Even getting them in here took two guys. The other guy that was with me was almost 300 pounds, and the two of us were like trying to wrestle the thing into the ground. They're just big columns of water, and even the pups they're not easy to divide off, except when you get a real little teeny one. Pretty much, they're just committed at this point. I hope whoever lives here enjoys bananas, because that root in the ground is probably like that big now.
How does it die off in its natural habitat?
They just keep spreading out from the center usually, and they don't usually die. They just keep slowly growing, unless they get a pest or something that eats the middle. And sometimes what will happen is the biggest trees are in the middle. You'll have bananas spread out in clumps because the middle of it is kind of died off, fruited and died off. It's a slowly growing thing. If you manage it properly, you can really get high yields. But I'm interested in yields for no work, or little to no work. And so I try to come up with systems that, I'm not just growing bananas, I'm growing a bazillion things, you know. I want a bit of everything instead of full-on banana production.
Nice round diet.
Right, exactly. I was saying one of our problems.
I wonder what the permitting regulations are on having. What's the permitting regulation on having your kitchen sink?
Oh, there's no permits for that.
You don't.
No.
So don't try to get a permit.
Don't ask, don't tell.
Yeah, I mean, when we bought the house, like, I'm sure this was not permitted. It does not look like a permitted
This
job.
is Marion County.
It doesn't matter. Yeah, Marion County, they kind of leave you alone for the most part. I mean, particularly agricultural land. We're agricultural. Nobody cares. Nobody inspects. I built the tree fort out front. Nobody said anything. I don't mow the lawn. Nobody